as Mark likes to say, is tens of millions of Americans, have no empathy for these federal workers that have been collecting paychecks for years and years and years, and have no repercussions if they don't produce. So that's one thing. The
Yes,
other
sir.
the other thing I wanted to talk about was Ukraine. Most Americans, or tens of millions of Americans, are tired of Ukraine. We're tired of spending money over there when money could be spent here. So those are the type
Yep.
things. Have,
Tony, you're absolutely right about those. And the tens of millions applies to both those points of view. Let Dan comment, and then Sean, just because we're headed towards the end here. Dan.
Yeah, Sean, I'll be quick. One, I agree with you about cuts. Like, it happens. And to your point, there isn't a lot of sympathy. And Sean's made the same point because this happens in the business world. I think the one difference is in the business world, when you make cuts and you have to shrink, small things can fall through the cracks as long as, like, your biggest customers, you kind of keep on board to keep paying you to then ramp back up. Government doesn't work that way. You basically serve almost the lowest common denominator, and you have to serve everybody all at once. So again, this is about kind of how you go about it. And I agree with you, and I think this is Democrats' problems. They're focused. They don't want to talk about how they would do this to ultimately shrink the government. And I think on Ukraine, you're right. A lot of people, and this is true even in the Democratic Party, a lot of the Democratic base would rather this money be spent at home than abroad. And again, one of the things I think Democrats have to think about is in 2028, we can't just say we're going to go back to the way it was with NATO, with everybody. We've got to come up with what is a new construct for the future. We can't just say his stinks. And that's going to be a challenge.
Sean.
Tony, I'm glad you brought up COVID, because I agree with you. There's empathy for anybody that's lost their job, but for thousands, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs during COVID. And those were government decisions as well. And I don't know how many times we've had to go back now and relitigate that, but thousands of people lost their jobs. Thousands of kids were deprived of an education in critical years because of key government decisions. So, it's interesting to me how we care about people and who we care about. And we should, like I said, it's a great point that you're making about the destruction that occurred during COVID and the lack of accountability that still exists. On Ukraine, look, the thing that I found fascinating this weekend is I think Putin's a horrible guy, Russia's the aggressor, and we need to stop them, right? 100%. But two things can be true at the same time. Ukraine is an inherently corrupt country. The Biden State Department put out a report about it. Zelensky said a couple of weeks ago he didn't know where half the money was. And you can actually, and that's what's driving a lot of this, is that for years, we've basically been saying, we'll just keep throwing good money after bad. Well, there are things in the United States that aren't getting done, money that we don't have. And I think that the lack of accountability and what we're seeing now, where everyone says, if you have any criticism of Ukraine, you're spewing Russian talking points, is ridiculous. I don't want Russia to advance. I want them to stop. I want the killing to stop. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you give a blank check to Ukraine.
Yeah, Sean, but I want to be clear. We weren't throwing good money after bad. We were arming somebody to stop someone who had invaded them.
Okay. And throwing good money after bad, both.
Yeah.
Tony,